Today we're going to talk about, at ThoughtSpots University, a topic that I think has a lot of folklore in many languages, not just JavaScript, and that is passing by value or passing by reference. And so in JavaScript, primitives are passed by value, and everything else is an object and therefore passed by reference. So let's first talk about what primitive types are. A primitive is effectively a type. Now, one of the cheesy questions that is often asked in interviews is, what are the primitives of JavaScript? Do you know what they are? I don't necessarily believe any value is gleaned from knowing this code, but one should know it cold nonetheless. So in JavaScript, there are 5 primitives, and they are undefined, null, I should spell null correctly, Boolean, string, and number. So these are primitive types that are simply values. They're not objects, they just hold values. So an example of this is A is equal to 5, B is equal to 6. We have 2 variables that are declared here. One holds the value of 5, one holds the value of 6, and they just simply are representative of those values. So when you say something is copied by value, it literally means that. It means that the value of one variable is copied to a variable is copied to the value of another variable, but their memory addresses effectively don't change. So let's look at an example. I have a function foo, and foo takes a number here. Foo is going to add, let's say, 10 to the number, and foo is just going to print the number out to the screen here, standard out. Right, so the caller of foo will pass in a number, and of course this is brief with no error checking of sorts. We will add 10 to number, and we'll print that number to the screen. So let's first see what the value of A is by printing A to the screen. Let's now call foo, passing the variable A, and then let's call console.log again to see if indeed the value of A has changed. Now what we expect, because it is passed by value, that the value of A will be unchanged. So line 13 and line 11 will print the exact same values, which is 5. Foo, however, internally will print 15. This function here will be called on line 12. The value of A will be copied to the input parameter or variable number. Number will distinctly and solely add 10 to its value and print that to the screen, but that will not change A because effectively, again, it is a copy. So let's run, see what we get here. So if we actually run it, we get 5, 15, and 5 as expected. The value of A has not been changed by the function foo because the value of A was copied into the variable num. That happens for all JavaScript primitives. So now let's look at objects. In our last lesson, we learned that we can create an object. We can create an empty object with the curly braces, and effectively we understand that my object is an empty object as designated by the curly braces. We can also add key value pairs. So let's say x is 1, y is 2. I now have an object that has 2 keys, x and y, with the respective values of 1 and 2. So the key x has a value of 1, the key y has a value of 2. If I print that to the screen, we will see that we actually print our object. So our object has x as 1, y as 2. We've printed this in an object notation, which is very JSON-esque here, and we see an object representation here. Now what happens to object if I create a function called change me, and I say 17, 17. I print the object here. So I have a function here called change me that receives an object. Again, we're being brief here. There's no error checking of sorts. You're going to pass in an object. You know what the properties of those objects are. And on line 19, you're going to change the value. So here on line 16, we're going to print out the object. X will be 1, Y will be 2. We've already seen that. Here we're going to, whoever calls this is going to actually change the value because again, we're passing by reference. By reference means the underlying objects have the same address. They are referring to or referencing the same value. So the objects have a different name, could have a different name in your editor or in your code, but underneath they are representing the same memory address. Therefore, if you change an object, you change the value for everyone referencing that object. So here I'm going to call change me and I'm going to pass my object. Then so let's get rid of all this other gunk. So what I expect to happen here is that I expect to, on line 6, print out the object that you've seen before. X is 1, Y is 2. I define a function here. I then call the function with my object. Inside this function on line 9, we change one of the key value pairs or one of the properties to have a value of 17 instead of 1. We print that to the screen. Then we call console.log. So what we expect to happen is on line 14, we will print X is 17, Y is 2, where that will be different than what's printed on line 6, where X is 1 and Y is 2. Because it is by reference, we have effectively changed the values. And let's see that work. As expected, we're printing X is 1 and Y is 2. X is 17. That middle line is the representation of what's happening inside the function. And then the last line is printing the object after the function has been called. And that is what we get when we pass by value and by reference. So as a sort of an additional tidbit here is arrays are objects. So it might surprise you to know that if you declare an array, let's say 1, 2, 3, I see this missed all the time, array 2 is equal. What happens if I say this? Let's see here. So these arrays are actually not equal. They contain the same values, but they're not equal because when you're talking about objects and you use the double equal operator, which we will have a separate lesson on of note, you're really saying that they have the same value and they're referencing the same thing. Objects are references. So when you use the equal operator, you want to say that they are referencing the actual same thing. So we'll do this here. So let's run this again. Oh, sorry. And as you see here, the objects are actually not equal because I have declared them as two distinct variables. Therefore, they have two distinct addresses. Now that said, if I declare another variable and assign it to array, those are indeed the same. So if I copy this code up here, and I change this to array3, those are actually going to be equal because I've assigned the reference of array to the reference of array3, so they are actually the same. So if I run that, you will see now we print they are equal. So that concludes our very simplistic lesson on objects and JavaScript primitives. Play around with it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.